Chuck Norris didn't have to pretend to be tough. Before he was an action star or a primetime lawman, he was a martial artist with a rack of real belts and a resume written on gym mats. Black belt in judo, third degree in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, fifth degree in karate, eighth degree in taekwondo, ninth degree in tang soo do, and 10th degree in chun kuk do, the hybrid style he helped develop. Then Hollywood did what it does to people who radiate the thing other actors studied to fake. It made a genre around him. Good guys wear black. The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, Code of Silence, Missing in Action, The Delta Force. Millions more met him on TV, wearing a Stetson and a badge as Cordell Walker on Walker, Texas Ranger, dispensing roundhouse justice across 8 seasons and a string of TV movies. On Friday, of the family of Carlos Ray, Chuck Norris announced that he died that morning in Hawaii at 86, after being hospitalized the day before. While we would like to keep the circumstances private, please know that he was surrounded by his family and was at peace, they said, adding that to the world he had been a martial artist, actor, and a symbol of strength, and to them, a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, an incredible brother, and the heart of our family. In later years, the culture turned him into a meme. Chuck Norris kills 100% of germs. Paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, but Chuck Norris beats all 3. Because that's how the internet metabolizes icons. But the reason the joke stuck is the same reason his films did. He meant it. The kicks were real. The bearing was earned. And this is a look back in the spirit of a man who prized discipline and purpose. The facts of the life, the shape of the career, the credibility under the choreography, the TV pivot that made him a weekly ritual, the brotherhood and loss that animated his Vietnam rescues, the odd afterlife as the internet's favorite tall tale, the politics and faith he claimed without flinching, and the family that held all of it up. No speculation about what he chose to keep private. Just a clean record of how a kid from Ryan, Oklahoma became a shorthand for American toughness and left a stack of belts, films, and memories behind. The statement came with the kind of clarity families of famous people learn the hard way. Chuck Norris, hospitalized in Hawaii on Thursday, died Friday morning at 86, his family wrote, on declining to share specifics and asking for privacy. He was surrounded by his family and was at peace, the message said, and then did the most important thing any obituary can do: place the public man back in the house where he was loved. To the world, he was a martial artist, actor, and a symbol of strength. To us, he was a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, an incredible brother, and the heart of our family. They closed with a sentence that reads less like PR than like a table grace. He lived his life with faith, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to the people he loved. Through his work, discipline, and kindness, he inspired millions around the world and left a lasting impact on so many lives. That framing matters because Norris's public image ballooned beyond the ordinary possibilities of an obituary. He wasn't just an actor, he was a meme. He wasn't just a karate champion. He was the one who fought Bruce Lee on screen in 1972's The Way of the Dragon. A scene so primal in its pacing and posture that it still gets taught in edit bays and dojos. For years, strangers projected a cartoon of invincibility onto a man whose real resume already defied cliché. The family's words pull the myth back to the man. A spouse, a father, a grandfather, a brother. A believer who wrote books with Christian and patriotic themes. A person whose circle saw the everyday steadiness that the camera called charisma. It's customary in moments like this for fans to ask for details out of love and curiosity. The right answer is in the statement. Let the circumstances stay with the people who stood at the bed. There's more than enough to honor in what's on the record and what the work itself still does when you press play. Grief, for stars with cults, can turn parasocial fast. For a figure who trained so hard to make hard things look simple, a simple benediction fits. The man died, the work lives, the family asked for quiet, obliged them. Carlos Ray Norris was born in Ryan, Oklahoma, to a father who had served in World War II. If the first chapters of his life read like a mid-century American draft, That's because they were. In 1958, he joined the U.S. Air Force as an air policeman, AP. Osan Air Base in South Korea gave him two things that would follow him for the rest of his life: a nickname, Chuck, and a calling. He began training in Tang Soo Do, often rendered Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art descended from karate. I learned the discipline in its stances and strikes, and did what ambitious students do: keep going. Back in the States, he served as an AP at March Air Force Base in California until his discharge in 1962. The post-service years could have turned into small-town drift. Instead, Norris built a platform. He worked for Northrop, an aerospace company, and opened a chain of karate schools up and down California. The client list made for good gossip even then. Steve McQueen, who would later tip him toward acting classes at MGM, Bob Barker, Priscilla Presley, Donnie and Marie Osmond, Chad McQueen. He was doing two jobs at once, teaching and competing, and winning enough to stack belt rankings and tournament hardware that would later serve as more than props on sets. In a business obsessed with image, Norris's pride of place among action stars rested on something real. He didn't learn to fight for a part. He learned to fight because it's what he loved. There's a lesson in the way the path zigzags. The airbase mattered not for the uniform alone, but for the exposure. To a culture, a language of movement, and a discipline he could carry home. The schools mattered not only because they kept him close to practice, but because they taught him how to lead a room, how to hold an audience, correct a posture, motivate a flagging student. Acting classes at MGM, nudged by McQueen in 1974, came after a public life in which he had already learned some of the craft the camera craves: presence, patience, and the necessity of repetition. By the time Norris met Bruce Lee at a Long Beach martial arts demonstration and later squared off against him on film, he wasn't a stuntman drafted for a scene. He was a peer invited into a cinematic spar that still vibrates when you watch it now. There's a reason every Norris obituary spends a paragraph in the Coliseum. The Way of the Dragon, known in the U.S. as Return of the Dragon, is a 1972 film directed by and starring Bruce Lee, with Norris cast as Colt, the American heavy who meets Lee's Tang Lung in Rome. The fight is a study in kinetics and character. It opens with etiquette, a bow, and then proceeds like an essay on two styles and two bodies. Norris, hairy-chested, heavier, planted. Lee, feline, flashing, kinetic. The scene breathes. It lets you see adjustments. Lee's smile after warming up. Colt's surprise when speed trumps mass, the moment the smaller man plucks a fistful of chest hair and blows it away like dandelion fluff. It ends with pity. Lee's character refuses to finish Colt until Colt forces him to. The camera respects both men's skill and our attention span. There are no guitar licks. There's footwork. For Norris, that scene did more than put his name beside Bruce Lee's. It changed how Hollywood could frame his confidence. He didn't have to be introduced as a brute. He could be sold as a technician. Later films leaned into that image. The Octagon with its ninja mystique. Lone Wolf McQuade with its martial arts meets Western mashup. Code of Silence, where he played a cop who fights as if his bones remember tournaments. The missing wink that some critics noted. No Schwarzeneggerian self-parody. Like no Jackie Chan pratfalls. Makes more sense when you trace it back to Rome. Norris didn't need to leaven his menace with whimsy. He had an ethic that didn't overheat. He believed in the technique. He filmed it. The Lee connection also anchored him in a lineage that segmented the action star pantheon. There were the athletes, Norris, Siegel, Van Damme, with real belt lineages. The bodybuilders, Schwarzenegger, who turned hypertrophy into myth. The comics, Chan, later The Rock, who fold slapstick into spectacle. And the everymen, Eastwood, Willis, who sell grit and sarcasm more than dojo cred. Norris was the American martial artist who kept his movements readable in the frame. That's a legacy disguised as a choice. If you can't see the technique, the victory is meaningless. If the 1980s had a studio for kinetic pulp, it was Cannon Films. And Chuck Norris was its fixture. From 1984 to 1988, He starred in 8 Cannon productions, including the 3 Missing in Action films, the 2 Delta Force entries, and Firewalker. Critics will tell you Code of Silence, a 1985 Orion title directed by Andrew Davis, is among his best films. A Chicago cop picture that feels almost documentarian in its fistfights and mood. Box office receipts tell you something else. Audiences craved Norris in rescue mode and righteous fury. Missing in Action, 1984. The first in a series built around the fantasy of American POWs left behind in Vietnam and brought home by an uncompromising commando, tapped into a cultural ache. For Norris, it was personal. His younger brother, Wieland, was killed in Vietnam, and Chuck dedicated the films to his memory. For others, including critics of Cannon and Norris, and the cycle felt like a derivative echo of Stallone's Rambo myth, a convenient way to rerun a national wound with different endings. Norris's image in those films, tight-lipped, efficient, moral certainty in boots, became shorthand for a kind of pop conservatism. He didn't do quips. He did the job. Good guys wear black, the octagon, an eye for an eye. The titles telegraphed the thesis. As taste evolved and action stars learned to sell irony alongside impact, he held the line. That doesn't make his films immune to critique. It makes them legible artifacts of their moment. When Delta Force snarls across a tarmac, you're watching Cold War fantasies in 24 frames per second. When Lone Wolf McQuade drinks beer like water and gets his Dodge buried, you're watching Texas mashed with dojo myth. The Cannon run also did something every star needs. It taught a team how to shoot him. Choreographers, stunt coordinators, cinematographers, once they've done a few films with a body like Norris's, they learn how to build frames around his speed and range. You can feel that in the angles, in the way a kick's arc is allowed to travel across a medium shot rather than being hidden in an edit. It's why, even when budgets sag or scripts thin, the fights are watchable. The camera respects what's happening in front of it. When Norris stepped into The Expendables 2 in 2012, after a 7-year hiatus, he arrived as a legacy cameo, a tip of the hat to the belt under the belt. It worked because audiences remembered the grammar. When movie offers thinned, Norris made a move too many stars attempt too late. He switched mediums while his persona still had TV magnetism to cash. CBS's Walker, Texas Ranger, 1993 to 2001, wasn't prestige drama. It was appointment television for people who wanted a weekly parable about courage and community, with a roundhouse each act and a sermon's worth of moral clarity by credits. Inspired in part by Lone Wolf McQuade, the show cast Norris as Cordell Walker, a modern lawman with Apache heritage, a code, and a stuntman's knees. If the movie served doctrine in 90 minutes, Walker ladled it out in spoonfuls that made you want seconds. The move did more than extend his career. It fixed his image for a generation. Children who never saw his Cannon films met him as Walker first. Grandparents who missed the theaters watched the Stetson because it lived in their house for 8 seasons and a pair of TV movies. The role gave him time to be softer in windows, mentoring, romance, community plots, without ditching the kicks. It also cemented the style difference that defined him against his peers. He wasn't making fun of himself the way Arnold would in Kindergarten Cop or Willis in Moonlighting. He wasn't mining slapstick like Jackie Chan. He was playing Walker from the inside out. Righteous, rooted, at times unbending, almost always right in the show's moral universe. Behind the scenes, the Norris family's imprint deepened. Brother Aaron Norris produced several Cannon titles and became a producer on Walker. The dynasty extended on screen, sons Eric and Mike acting, daughters Dakota, Danilee, and Dinah, and eventually grandchildren, with the longer biography penciling in a picture of a man whose work and home interlocked. It's part of the reason the family statement rings true. You can feel the contours in the career. Walker also prefigured the meme years. By turning Norris into a weekly ritual of indomitable competence, the show accidentally wrote the punchlines the internet would pick up a decade later. You can draw a direct line from Walker never loses to Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. A culture that loves hyperbole found its avatar in a TV ranger who made the impossible a mid-episode act break. By the mid-2000s, another generation discovered Chuck Norris not by renting missing in action, but by forwarding jokes. Chuck Norris facts, born in corners of the internet that sharpened one-liners for sport, turned him into a hipster Paul Bunyan. Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice. When Chuck Norris does a push-up, he isn't lifting himself up. He's pushing the earth down. Chuck Norris can slam a revolving door. They were ridiculous on purpose, an absurdity arms race that lasted because the image they were inflating had a real center. The jokes don't work if the subject is flimsy. They need a baseline of believability. You might not think Norris could bench press the moon, but you knew, deep down in your dad's VHS drawer, that he could bench press a Chevy. Norris, to his credit, played along. He leaned into the phenomenon with a chuckle, parlaying it into cameos, ad campaigns, and a late-career public warmth that sat oddly and charmingly alongside the stern heroes he made his name playing. He hawked workout equipment and infomercials because he actually cared about training, not because he was winking. He wrote books with Christian and patriotic lenses because that's who he was, not because a publicist pushed a demographic play. The facts didn't cannibalize the man. They gave the culture a goofy shared language for a face and gait that had already earned their way into living rooms. There's a more complicated read of the meme moment, too. In an era when action stars were shifting from bruised older men to superheroes in capes, the Norris myth offered a comforting retrofit. We could have impossible in jeans and boots, and the jokes let fans and critics defang an image that might otherwise feel lumbering in a post-9/11, post-Iraq media diet. They also let Norris travel between communities that wouldn't have shared a theater in the 1980s. Tech nerds, red state dads, college kids, CrossFit boxes. If you wanted a one-liner to crack a room with clashing politics, a Chuck Norris fact got your foot in the door. By the time memes arrived, Norris had already been speaking plainly about faith and politics for years. A longtime supporter of conservative politicians, he endorsed candidates, wrote columns, and published books with Christian and patriotic themes. In a fandom that prefers its heroes apolitical, his outspokenness sometimes cost him cachet. In communities that cherish the blending of scripture and service, it earned him clout. The oddity was how comfortably it matched his screen persona. Walker wasn't a nihilist. Missing in action wasn't ironic. Norris's personal convictions, pro-military, pro-faith, adamantly American, were not a cynical late-career pivot. They were a through line. None of that made him a demagogue. He didn't try to reframe his films as manifestos. He didn't drag his co-stars into positions they didn't share. He did what citizens do with platforms: spoke, wrote, showed up. In later years, he split his media work between advocacy and fitness infomercials, a combination that says more about his priorities than any screed. For a man whose public image was hyper-masculine, the Christian framing let him soften sharp edges with language of service, family, and discipline. For critics who wanted the politics to stain the art, I did offered another reading: The Consistency of a Man Who Did Daily Duty as He Saw It. Norris's first screen credit, uncredited, is an amuse-bouche for a career that would later be anything but anonymous. The Wrecking Crew, 1969. A Dean Martin-Matt Helm romp with Sharon Tate. Small scenes led to big ones. The Long Beach demo where he met Bruce Lee led to a nemesis turn that would make him a fixture. McQueen, who practiced at his schools, told him to take acting classes at MGM in 1974, a push that mattered as much as any tournament win. Breaker, 1977, made him a leading man, a trucker looking for his brother in a corrupt town, a plot that would become an archetype. Good Guys Wear Black, The Octagon, An Eye for an Eye, Lone Wolf McQuade, one-word titles that might seem generic if he hadn't made them the genre. When the canon period ebbed and TV turned him into a ritual, his filmography cropped and shifted. By 2005's The Cutter, a straight-to-DVD title, the film work was less about building persona than about servicing a fan base. After a 7-year absence from screens, The Expendables 2, 2012, brought him back as a punchline you respected. He entered the frame like an answer to a 1980s trivia question and exited with applause, self-aware but still squared. You can tell a lot about a star by how they handle legacy cameo work. Norris didn't milk the joke. He honored the character fans built for him with their facts, tipped his hat to the rest of the room, and left. What the long view grants is a sense of method. He learned where to stand on set because he had taught thousands where to stand on mats. He understood safety because he understood fight choreography from the inside. Directors liked him because he hit marks and punches with the same precision. Co-stars liked him because he was a pro. The invincibility myth can obscure the obvious truth. Men who look easy on screen have sweated through decades of ugly practice elsewhere. Before any frame of film, there were rooms. After his Air Force service, Norris opened karate schools, taught, and built a network of students who would carry what they learned into other careers. Steve McQueen and his son Chad trained with him. Bob Barker, Priscilla Presley, Donnie, and Marie Osmond are on the roll sheet. So are thousands of people whose names you wouldn't recognize but whose kids will tell you about a dojo where they learned to bow before they learned to punch. He codified his teaching into Chun Kuk Do, the universal way, a hybrid style that mixed Korean and Japanese elements, and, above all, Norris's core ethic: discipline, respect, and repetition. The rank tape across his belt wasn't cosplay, it was currency. That teaching legacy often gets overshadowed by filmographies and obituaries. It shouldn't. In an America that learned martial arts through the cinema, men like Norris translated dojang and dojo language for people whose only frame of reference was a movie house. The result was clumsy sometimes, strip mall schools and mismatched GIs, and life-saving others. A generation that learned the difference between hitting someone and holding their balance. A group of kids who got a place to practice focus and humility instead of fidgeting in rooms where neither was taught. If you're tallying impact, not just dollars, the schools add up. Remembering that is a way to return Norris to his real scale. Not just a VHS god, but a teacher. It would be easy to end with the masks, the Walker hat, the aviators, the tan fatigues, the Canon credits. Norris's family made it impossible to forget the rooms that mattered more. He was married twice, to Diane Holchek from 1958 until their 1988 divorce, and to Gina O'Kelly, whom he married in 1998 and who survives him. He's also survived by sons Eric and Mike, daughters Dakota, Danilee, and Dina, and grandchildren whose names don't need to be in print to be known by the right people. His younger brother Wieland, killed in Vietnam, haunts the missing in action years and reminds you that war films, for the people who make them, are sometimes gravestones carried into theaters. The longer biography includes his service as an air policeman, his work at Northrop, the chain of schools, the endorsements, the books, the middle American conservatism some celebrated and others decried, the memes, the ad campaigns, the late-life cameos. But the first and last lines are the same. A man loved by a family he loved back. A believer who took his duties seriously. A professional who treated his body like an instrument and his mind like a classroom. A public symbol who tried to keep the private circle intact. If you want to honor that ledger, skip grandiosity. Tell the truth about the films and the fights. Acknowledge the politics and the laughter. Then say what his family said already. He was at peace. He was surrounded by people who loved him, and he lived on purpose. In a media ecosystem that will spend the week making jokes in his honor, the quiet rest of that sentence is the benediction that matters. Chuck Norris's career is easy to summarize badly. He kicked people on camera, wore a hat on TV, wrote a few books, made a few ads, spawned a million jokes, and took a side in politics. The better summary is harder because it has to account for the texture under the tropes. An Oklahoma kid who learned how to stand guard and learned a martial art in Korea. A young man who taught others before he starred. A fighter whose bout with Bruce Lee still hums with mutual respect. A working actor who carried a decade of Canon muscle and then found a second life on CBS. A teacher who codified a style and opened doors. A meme subject who laughed along without surrendering the person his people knew. He died in Hawaii at 86, with family beside him, circumstances kept private by design. His survivors include his wife Gina, 5 children, and a line of grandchildren. His filmography includes more roundhouses than most men can count. His belt rack includes degrees that few can match. His internet legacy is silly and affectionate. His faith is the quiet note his family chose to sound. His place in the canon is strange and secure. An action star of credibility in an era that loved credibility. A TV ritual in an era that loved ritual. A punchline in an era that made punchlines for love, not cruelty. If you want to say goodbye in a way he would recognize, keep it simple. Go watch the Colosseum fight and admire the footwork. Revisit Code of Silence and note how stillness can be an actor's best move. Cue an episode of Walker on Texas Ranger and let the rhythm do what it did then. Calm the room, make right feel possible, kiss your own kids on the head at the credits. And if someone in your feed posts a Chuck Norris fact today, smile, then add the one line that makes the tall tale true. Before any of that, he did the work.